Gregory Peck reveals James Stewart's secrets. Gregory Peck was born in a quiet seaside town, La Jolla, California, in 1916. But nothing about his childhood hinted that he'd one day become one of Hollywood's moral giants. His parents split when he was just 6. He grew up mostly with his grandmother, a strict but loving woman who believed that hardship builds character. And that lesson stuck with him forever. While other boys dreamed of fame or adventure, Gregory found comfort in books, in quiet reflection, and later, on the stage. He studied medicine first, thinking he might save lives. But something inside him whispered that his real calling was different. He didn't just want to heal people, he wanted to move them. So he left behind the safe path, packed his few belongings, and went to New York to chase a dream everyone told him was impossible. No money, no connections. Just that deep voice, that tall frame, and a look in his eyes that said, "This man means what he says." Little did anyone know, that same integrity would one day define him, and make him the only man in Hollywood brave enough to speak about the hidden side of his friend James Stewart. But to understand why those secrets meant so much, you first have to understand who Gregory Peck really was, and why the world trusted him more than anyone else. In an industry built on illusions, Gregory Peck became something almost extinct. A man who stood for truth. The 1940s and 50s were full of stars, glamorous, charming, scandalous. But Peck, he was different. When others chased fame, he chased meaning. Every role he chose seemed to reflect a part of his soul. In The Keys of the Kingdom, he played a humble priest. In Gentleman's Agreement, he risked his career to expose anti-Semitism in America, a move considered dangerous at the time. And of course, there was To Kill a Mockingbird, the film that forever branded him as the face of decency itself. When Gregory Peck walked into a scene, you didn't just see an actor, you saw a man who made you believe goodness was still possible. He wasn't pretending. That was the difference. Behind the camera, he was just as fearless. He spoke against blacklisting during the Red Scare. He defended civil rights before it was popular. He once said, "You can't pretend to stand for justice on screen if you stay silent off it." That's why, when Gregory Peck talked, people listened. And when he finally decided to speak about the one man he admired most, his quiet, self-doubting friend James Stewart, Hollywood stopped to hear what he had to say. Because if Gregory Peck called something a secret, you knew it wasn't gossip. It was truth. The kind of truth only a man of integrity could reveal. And the first thing he revealed about Jimmy Stewart was that the man America thought they knew wasn't quite the whole story. Hollywood in the 1940s wasn't just a dream factory. It was a battlefield of egos, ambition, and illusion. But in the middle of all that noise, two men stood out for being different. Gregory Peck and James "Jimmy" Stewart. They didn't chase headlines. They didn't party with the press. They didn't fake humility for the cameras. Instead, they shared something rare. A quiet understanding that real greatness didn't need to scream. Their friendship began almost accidentally. Both were veterans, both outsiders in an industry of polished smiles. Stewart had flown bombing missions in World War II. Peck had spent his own youth trying to make sense of a broken world. When they met at a charity event in the late 40s, it wasn't fame that drew them together. It was respect. Peck later said that Stewart had the eyes of a man who had seen too much, and the soul of someone who refused to let that ruin him. They started having long dinners, late-night calls, quiet visits away from the spotlight. Two of the biggest stars in the world, talking not about money or movies, but about what it meant to be good in a business that rewarded everything but goodness. Their conversations were the kind of talks men rarely have anymore. Honest, vulnerable, and stripped of performance. Peck once joked that Jimmy Stewart was the only man in Hollywood who made me feel like I wasn't acting off camera. But what Peck learned from those talks went deeper than friendship. He discovered a truth about Stewart that almost no one else ever knew. A truth that shattered the public illusion of that easygoing, perfect boy-next-door image. Because behind that famous smile, Jimmy Stewart carried something heavy, something invisible, something Gregory Peck would one day call his greatest secret. Everyone in Hollywood thought Jimmy Stewart was just natural. He'd walk onto a set, deliver his lines in that slow, warm drawl, flash that shy grin, and suddenly, every heart in the theater melted. People said, he's not acting, he's just being himself. But Gregory Peck knew better. What looked effortless was carefully built. Jimmy's so-called naturalness came from hours, sometimes days, of meticulous preparation. He dissected scripts line by line, marking every pause, every breath. He studied how each word would sound in his mouth. He'd rehearse until his movements looked unplanned, until perfection felt accidental. Peck once revealed that Stewart would stay up late before filming, whispering dialogue to himself until the rhythm felt alive. He didn't just memorize lines, Peck said, he engineered them. Every blink, every stumble, it was designed to look real. That's why his performances hit so deep. They didn't feel rehearsed, because he rehearsed until it didn't feel like acting at all. But the industry didn't see that. They saw the charm, the simplicity, the boy next door. They had no idea how hard Jimmy worked to make natural look natural. And maybe that was the genius of it. He hid the art inside the truth. Gregory admired that. To him, it wasn't vanity. It was discipline disguised as ease. He once laughed, Jimmy fooled the whole world. They thought they were watching him be himself. They were watching a master at work. But as Peck would later learn, that obsessive perfection came from something darker, something buried deep inside Stewart that no one, not even his closest friends, suspected. Because the same man who made acting look easy was quietly fighting a war with himself. There's something strange about fame. The higher you rise, the quieter your fears become. And Jimmy Stewart, the man the world adored for his charm and warmth, lived with a fear he never fully escaped. He doubted himself. Constantly. Gregory Peck once said that, in private, Jimmy was nothing like the confident hero audiences saw on screen. He'd ask me, Peck recalled, "Greg, do you think I've still got another good one in me?" Think about that. A man who had already starred in It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and The Philadelphia Story, wondering if he was still good enough. That question haunted him. Jimmy wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing proof. Proof that he still mattered. Proof that people still cared. Because for him, acting wasn't just performance. It was identity. Without it, who was he? Peck noticed it every time they talked. The hesitation in Jimmy's voice, the slight pause before he'd accept a compliment. Even after decades of success, Stewart's biggest critic was always himself. Maybe that's what made his performances so powerful. The vulnerability wasn't fake. It was him. When you saw him tremble, or stammer, or tear up, it wasn't acting. It was the real man slipping through the cracks of the character. And Peck admired that. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. He said once, Jimmy's greatness came from the fact that he never believed he was great. That's what kept him real. But here's the twist most people don't know. Those self-doubts didn't start in Hollywood. They started somewhere darker, in the skies above Europe, during a war that would leave scars no one could see. Before the fame, before the Oscars, before the world called him America's everyman, Jimmy Stewart was a soldier. And not just any soldier. He was a bomber pilot in World War II. He led dangerous missions over Nazi Germany. And what he saw up there changed him forever. He never bragged about it. He didn't tell stories at parties or show off his medals. But the war followed him home, quietly, invisibly, like a shadow that never left. Gregory Peck, who was deeply empathetic and observant, saw it in his friend's eyes. He carried it, Peck said. You could see it when he thought no one was watching. Stewart flew more than 20 combat missions. He lost friends in the air, men who never made it back. He should have been celebrated as a hero. Instead, when he returned, he buried everything. He went straight back to work, pretending nothing had changed. But something had. Behind that steady smile was the constant hum of memory. The sound of engines, the faces of lost comrades, the guilt of surviving when others didn't. It wasn't something he could talk about, not even to those closest to him. That quiet suffering seeped into his roles. When he looked broken in It's a Wonderful Life, that wasn't performance, it was memory. That desperate look when George Bailey stands on the bridge, questioning everything, that was Jimmy's reality bleeding through the screen. Peck once said, you could feel the war in him. Not bitterness, responsibility. That sense of moral gravity, that sadness behind his smile, was what made him different from every other actor of his time. Jimmy Stewart wasn't just playing decent men, he was a man trying to redeem what he'd seen. And Gregory Peck, who understood pain in his own quiet way, felt an unspoken bond with that, because they were both men who carried the weight of the world, and somehow still found the strength to stand tall. Jimmy Stewart was a hero on the screen, but his real heroism often went unnoticed. Gregory Peck once said, "Jimmy's generosity was invisible. You never saw it, but it was there." Always. Stewart didn't seek praise. He didn't write op-eds. He didn't flaunt his charity. Instead, he sent handwritten letters to friends who were struggling. He mailed small, thoughtful gifts, just to remind someone they mattered. Sometimes he helped colleagues quietly, covering bills or giving advice without expecting a word of thanks. Peck witnessed it firsthand. During moments of personal difficulty, Stewart would appear with nothing more than a kind smile, a few words of encouragement, and maybe a little surprise that lifted a heavy heart. It wasn't grand, it wasn't showy, but in a world obsessed with attention and applause, it was radical. Peck admired that more than any on-screen performance. He never wanted recognition, Peck said. He just wanted to help. That's why he never made the headlines, because real goodness doesn't need a spotlight. And in a way, it made Stewart even more fascinating. The man everyone thought they knew was quietly shaping the lives of those around him, leaving an invisible trail of loyalty, care, and humanity. But kindness wasn't the whole story. Beneath the civility, Stewart had another side. A side full of surprises, laughter, and mischief. Most people think Jimmy Stewart was all decency and calm, the perfect gentleman. But Gregory Peck knew better. Jimmy had a playful streak, a trickster, a quiet mischief maker. Peck remembered sets where Stewart would hide someone's hat, flub a line just to see a co-star break into laughter, or sneak little pranks that made the day lighter. He was polite always, Peck said, but he loved chaos in the tiniest doses, harmless chaos that reminded everyone he was human. And that humor wasn't just for fun, it was survival. After years of war, fame, and endless public scrutiny, Stewart knew how heavy life could feel. He'd lightened it with laughter, and he shared that laughter with those who needed it most. It was the perfect balance, a man capable of moral courage, carrying the weight of loss and responsibility, yet still finding joy in small moments. Peck would often smile, saying, "People saw the calm, they saw the charm. But they never knew he could make you laugh until your stomach hurt, or prank you until you wanted revenge." That combination, the kindness and the mischief, made Stewart human in a way few stars ever are. It made him more relatable, more fascinating, more real. And as Peck would later explain, these were the secrets people didn't see on screen. Not flaws, not scandals, not gossip, but the quiet, invisible threads that wove together the man America loved without ever fully understanding him. But even all this charm and generosity didn't erase the inner battles Stewart still faced, the ones that would haunt him long after the cameras stopped rolling. Gregory Peck didn't just admire Jimmy Stewart for his talent, he admired him for his humanity. The quiet, unassuming kind that doesn't beg for applause. Peck often reflected on their friendship and realized something profound. Stewart's brilliance wasn't in his charm or even his fame. It was in his humility, his honesty, his willingness to let the world see him, warts and all. Peck said, "Jimmy never trying to be more than he was." And that's why he commanded respect, not just from audiences, but from anyone lucky enough to call him a friend. It was a mirror for Peck himself. He understood that Hollywood could twist even the best men into caricatures. But Stewart resisted. He kept his values intact. He stayed loyal, grounded, and uncorrupted. And Peck learned from that example. He began to see fame differently. Not as power, not as adoration, but as responsibility. Every role, every interview, every public moment became a test of integrity. And Stewart set the standard. Their friendship became a kind of silent mentorship. Not in acting technique, but in life. If Hollywood taught lessons in ambition, Stewart taught lessons in courage, kindness, and honesty. Peck said once, "Being around Jimmy reminded me that success without decency is meaningless. He made me want to be better, but admiration alone didn't protect them from life's harshest blows. Even the strongest men can't escape heartbreak." Behind closed doors, both men carried burdens Hollywood cameras could never capture. Gregory Peck endured heartbreak that left invisible scars. His eldest son, Jonathan, died tragically, an event Peck called the most terrible thing in his life. Even years later he admitted, "You never get over a thing like that." Jimmy Stewart, too, carried private pain, post-war trauma, the weight of personal doubts, and the pressures of an unforgiving industry never left him. But he, like Peck, faced it silently. The friendship between the two men became a sanctuary. They shared private conversations that no journalist would ever know, confessions that revealed their deepest fears and insecurities. Stewart would confide in Peck about doubts over performances. Peck would speak of grief at home. Together they understood something the public didn't. Fame didn't erase tragedy, it just hid it behind a polished smile. It's this duality that made their friendship extraordinary. They were giants in Hollywood, but they were still human, vulnerable, real. And it was that reality, the courage to live honestly despite loss, despite fear, that gave their on-screen performances their emotional power. Peck later explained that watching Stewart carry his private burdens with grace made him see the true measure of a man. "Talent is nothing without heart," Peck said, "and Jimmy had a heart bigger than anyone I ever knew. But even hearts that big can hide shadows." And Stewart's next secrets revealed just how complex that man really was. Hollywood is a place of illusions. Bright lights, flashing cameras, and endless applause can make even the most decent people forget who they are. Gregory Peck and Jimmy Stewart were different. They navigated this world without losing themselves, but that didn't mean it was easy. Peck once explained that most stars of their era were consumed by image. What to wear, what to say, how to act in public. Everything was calculated. Every smile, every gesture, every interview designed to keep the press happy. But Stewart, he refused to play that game. He didn't let fame define him. He didn't chase popularity. He didn't mold himself to Hollywood's whims. He remained the same man from Indiana who had entered the war as a young bomber pilot and returned with humility intact. Peck admired that fiercely. He noticed that Stewart's calm, grounded nature was like a secret anchor, one that kept not only him, but also those around him from being swept away by the tidal wave of Hollywood ego. And yet the contrast was constant. The world adored Stewart for his wholesome charm, yet few realized how much inner strength and struggle had gone into every line, every gesture. He played the everyman, but the truth was, he was extraordinary. Not because he sought it, but because he lived it quietly, faithfully, without fanfare. Hollywood rewarded image, not integrity. And that's why Stewart and Peck stood apart. They were men who refused to trade their souls for fame. But Peck also understood that this refusal carried its own cost: scrutiny, misunderstanding, and the constant battle to be both admired and authentic. And from watching Stewart navigate this, Peck learned one of the most important lessons of his life. Stewart's life was more than a series of films. It was a study in courage, humility, and resilience. Gregory Peck often said that Stewart's greatest lesson wasn't found in his lines or performances. It was in how he lived. Jimmy showed Peck that goodness isn't weakness, that moral courage isn't loud, flashy, or designed to be noticed. It's quiet, it's consistent, it's unglamorous, and yet it's transformative. Peck reflected on this while filming To Kill a Mockingbird. His portrayal of Atticus Finch, a man of principle and unwavering justice, wasn't inspired by other actors or directors. It was inspired by men like Jimmy Stewart, men who lived their convictions, who carried themselves with integrity, even when the world pressured them to compromise. Stewart also taught Peck about the subtle power of vulnerability. Being human, being flawed, admitting doubt, these weren't liabilities. They were what made a man relatable, respected, and ultimately unforgettable. And there was another lesson, one Peck never forgot. Friendship matters more than fame. Stewart's loyalty, kindness, and quiet support reminded Peck that relationships and trust are more enduring than any award or headline. Looking back, Peck described Stewart as a mirror for the soul. He said, "Jimmy taught me that the most important roles we play aren't on screen. They're in how we treat others, how we handle loss, and how we stand for what's right, even when no one is watching." That lesson shaped the rest of Peck's life, personally, professionally, and morally. It was a legacy passed quietly from one man to another, invisible to the world, yet monumental in its impact. And yet, Even after decades of admiration, love, and reflection, Peck knew there were still stories the public would never know. The deepest truths about Stewart that only a friend could witness. Years after the camera stopped rolling, Gregory Peck continued to speak about Jimmy Stewart, not as a co-star or celebrity, but as a man who had shaped his understanding of courage, humility, and humanity. Peck's admiration for Stewart never faded. Even in interviews late in his life, he spoke with a quiet reverence. Jimmy Stewart was the rare man who lived what he portrayed. Everything people loved about him on screen. The honesty, the kindness, the decency, it wasn't acting. It was him. Peck understood that true greatness isn't about awards, box office numbers, or adoration. It's about the lives you touch quietly, the integrity you maintain, and the consistency of your character. He often recounted small, intimate moments. The handwritten letters Stewart sent during hard times, the subtle gestures of loyalty to friends, the jokes and mischief that reminded everyone that beneath the public persona was a fully human, fully relatable man. Peck's reflections were more than admiration. They were a testament. He wanted the world to know that the public face of Jimmy Stewart was only half the story. The other half was the invisible, enduring goodness, the quiet strength, the loyalty, the humility that Stewart carried every day of his life. And as Peck grew older, he realized that sharing these insights wasn't just about honoring his friend. It was about teaching the world something vital. That true heroism is often unseen, uncelebrated, and quiet, but it shapes everything it touches. On June 12, 2003, the world lost Gregory Peck, a man whose presence on and off the screen had defined an era. Peck passed away peacefully at home in Los Angeles, a quiet farewell to a life lived with grace, integrity, and unwavering moral conviction. At his side was Veronique Pisani, his devoted wife of nearly 50 years, a reminder of the enduring love and partnership that had shaped his private world. His death marked more than the end of a legendary career. It marked the closing of a chapter in Hollywood history. A chapter where actors were defined not just by glamour, but by principles, courage, and authenticity. Fans and colleagues remembered him not just for Atticus Finch or Roman Holiday, but for how he carried himself. The dignity, the empathy, the steadfast commitment to truth. Even in passing, Peck symbolized something rare, a bridge between the golden age of Hollywood and timeless human values. And through all of it, Jimmy Stewart remained a part of that story. A silent, guiding presence in Peck's reflections, a mirror that reflected what it truly meant to be honorable, human, and extraordinary. In a world where fame is fleeting, where images are often more powerful than reality, Peck's life reminds us of something essential, that the true measure of a person is not in the applause they receive, but in the quiet lives they touch and the integrity they leave behind. The era of stars like Gregory Peck and Jimmy Stewart may have ended, but the lessons they lived, loyalty, courage, kindness, and authenticity, remain timeless. And for those who truly pay attention, the secrets Peck revealed about Stewart are not scandals or gossip. They are the blueprints of greatness, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. If you think the story of Jimmy Stewart and Gregory Peck is about Hollywood, you've missed the point. The real secret wasn't fame. It wasn't the awards. It wasn't even the charm that captivated millions. The secret was integrity. It was loyalty. It was being human when the world expected you to be perfect. Peck often said, Jimmy Stewart never let Hollywood change him. Fame didn't corrupt him. He stayed the same decent man from Indiana who always cared about people more than applause. Think about that for a moment. In a world obsessed with image, where every move is scrutinized, Stewart remained invisible in his goodness, unnoticed in his humility, yet monumental in impact. Gregory Peck spent decades sharing what he saw. He wanted the world to know that the greatness we admired on screen was only half the story. The other half, the part that mattered most, was Stewart's humanity, hidden in quiet acts of kindness, discipline, courage, and humor. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. The true measure of a person isn't what they display for the world, but what they do when no one is watching. It's the invisible choices, the subtle gestures, the relentless commitment to being good even when it's hard. For Peck, revealing Stewart's secrets wasn't about scandal. It was about honoring a man whose life quietly shaped the world for the better. A man who showed that real heroism doesn't need a spotlight. The story doesn't end with Peck's death in 2003 or Stewart's long before him. Their legacies live on, not just in films, but in the principles they embodied. Peck taught the world that courage, integrity, and decency are timeless. Stewart showed that vulnerability, humor, and loyalty are strengths, not weaknesses. Together they demonstrated that true greatness isn't born from fame or talent alone. It's forged in quiet, daily choices, in how you treat others, and in the courage to remain yourself when everything around you demands compromise. Generations of actors, fans, and friends continue to study their work. But the real lesson isn't in how to act on screen, it's in how to live off screen. Peck's reflections about Stewart remain especially poignant. Jimmy was as good a man off-screen as he was on-screen. And that's saying a lot. In other words, the greatest secrets aren't the ones hidden from the public. They're the ones lived quietly, faithfully, and morally, shaping everyone around you without a single headline, without a single award, without a single fanfare. For today's world, where attention is fleeting and screens compete for every second of our lives, their story reminds us to pause, observe, and recognize the invisible acts of greatness around us, to see goodness when it's not performing, to understand that the most enduring legacies are often silent, subtle, and unassuming. Gregory Peck and Jimmy Stewart left behind more than films. They left guides for living with dignity, courage, and humanity, lessons that will outlast every moment of fame, every red carpet, and every Hollywood headline. And maybe that's the real secret Hollywood never taught us. In Hollywood, where alliances shift faster than the spotlight, real friendship is rare. But what Gregory Peck and Jimmy Stewart shared was something entirely different. It wasn't built on fame, or success, or convenience. It was built on respect, on truth, on quiet, unshakable loyalty. They didn't need to see each other every day. They didn't need to brag about their bond. But when one of them was hurting, the other always seemed to know. Peck once said that Jimmy had this uncanny ability to reach out exactly when you needed him most, never asking for attention, never making it about himself. Just a short note, a phone call, or a simple gesture that said, "I'm here, and I care." It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. When Peck went through personal tragedy, the loss of his eldest son, it was Jimmy who quietly stepped forward. No cameras, no reporters, just presence, just empathy. That's something fame can't buy. It's something only character can give. Their friendship wasn't loud, it was steady. The kind that doesn't fade with time because it's rooted in something deeper than shared success. It's rooted in shared humanity. And that's what makes their bond so fascinating. It reminds us that even in a world built on illusion, authenticity still exists. That the strongest relationships are forged not in front of the camera, but behind closed doors, in moments of honesty and vulnerability. Gregory Peck never stopped honoring that friendship. He carried it with him, like an invisible medal, proof that real connection doesn't need the spotlight. And maybe, just maybe, that was one of Gregory Peck's own secrets. That his strength, his grace, his moral gravity, all of it was sustained by the quiet loyalty of a friend who understood him better than anyone else ever could. But that wasn't the only thing he carried from Stewart's example. There was something even deeper. When the curtain finally falls and the cameras stop rolling, what's left? For most actors, nothing but reels of celluloid, fading headlines, and forgotten names. But for Gregory Peck and Jimmy Stewart, what remained was something far more enduring. Truth. The truth of a life lived with integrity. The truth of kindness extended without expectation. The truth of a friendship that outlived fame. Peck often said that Hollywood is obsessed with immortality, but it chases it in the wrong ways. Actors want to be remembered through fame, through glory, through applause, but none of those things last. What lasts are the moments of humanity. The times you stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. The words you said that gave someone hope. The compassion you offered when the world wasn't looking. Peck believed that this was the essence of Stewart's legacy, and ultimately his own. That's why, even after decades, audiences still feel something when they watch It's a Wonderful Life or To Kill a Mockingbird. It's not nostalgia. It's not just admiration. It's recognition. The quiet realization that these men weren't just acting. They were revealing the parts of the human soul that never go out of style. When the lights dim and the set falls silent, only one question really matters. Did you live with grace? Did you matter to someone? Did you leave the world better than you found it? Gregory Peck and Jimmy Stewart did. Their stories weren't about fame. They were about faith, loyalty, and the courage to stay real in a world built on pretending. And maybe that's why, even now, their names still echo with something deeper than celebrity. Because when everything else fades, truth endures.